When you see an officer wearing body armor, carrying a carbine, and wearing tactical gear, it's easy to assume you are looking at a soldier. In Canada, that assumption blurs the line between a civilian police force and an active military. That blur is intentional, but it has nothing to do with modern warfare. In 1873, the government created the Northwest Mounted Police to assert sovereignty across the western frontier and manage relations during early settlement. To maintain order in isolated, sparsely populated territories, the early force adopted strict hierarchies. They used chains of command, tight formations, and severe disciplinary codes to keep their outposts functioning. That history leaves a heavy visual legacy. Today, the public sees a member in red serge, hears titles like corporal or inspector, and spots military-style rank insignia on their shoulders. Those details project a combat-ready authority, but they mask the reality of the organization. The modern Royal Canadian Mounted Police operates entirely outside the structure of national defense. For a true baseline of military operations, we look to the Canadian Armed Forces, the entity tasked with deploying lethal capability to protect national sovereignty. This matrix outlines exactly how these two institutions operate. We are going to clear the confusion by tracking their legal frameworks, training requirements, and ultimate missions side by side. Confusing a police officer with a soldier creates a massive blind spot. If you are applying to serve, it misaligns your career expectations. If you are a citizen, it distorts your understanding of civil rights and the lawful limits of police authority. The boundary between these forces is written in legislation. The RCMP operates under the RCMP Act, a mandate that limits their duties to enforcing federal laws, investigating crimes, and keeping domestic peace. The military operates under the National Defense Act. This grants the Canadian Armed Forces specific authority to engage in international combat operations and execute rules of war when authorized by the state. This chart maps their authority. The RCMP sits up here. Every use of force must be justified by the charter under civilian law. The armed forces sit down here, applying lethal force governed by military doctrine and rules of engagement. Operating on civilian soil, the RCMP is scrutinized by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. This independent body ensures officers prioritize constitutional rights over aggressive action. The military bypasses civilian courts entirely for operational matters. They answer internally to the Department of National Defense, maintaining a completely separate military justice system geared toward discipline and combat readiness. The distinction is absolute. A police officer uses force to safely detain a suspect for trial. A soldier uses force to neutralize an enemy combatant on a battlefield. The confusion often spikes during recruitment. The 26-week cadet training program at the RCMP's Depot Division requires trainees to march in formation, shine boots to a mirror finish, and operate under strict drill sergeants. But the actual curriculum is built for the courtroom, not the trenches. Cadets spend hours mastering the criminal code, proper evidence handling, de-escalation tactics, and safe suspect control. Compare that to the military's basic training in Quebec. Recruits are evaluated on weapon systems proficiency, identifying ambush points, fieldcraft, and surviving hostile environments. This makes the RCMP a classic paramilitary organization. The term means they use the organizational framework of an army, the ranks, the discipline, the uniforms, but they possess zero mandate for warfare. You see this paramilitary concept in action during the RCMP's musical ride. The choreography and the lances are heavy with military tradition, but they are instruments of public pageantry and heritage. Even physical preparation diverges. A Mountie trains for aerobic endurance, the capacity to chase a suspect, manage an erratic individual safely, and stay alert through a grueling 12-hour shift. A soldier conditions for extreme load-bearing marches and sustained physical trauma. When RCMP officers deploy internationally to places like Haiti, go to train local police forces in investigative methods. When the military deploys internationally, they establish forward operating bases and secure territory. Arriving at Depot expecting a military boot camp focused on assault tactics means you will fail. The RCMP filters for candidates who can pass an academic exam on legal procedure right after a physical sprint. The line between the two forces gets blurry when we look at national security. Counterterrorism investigations often sound identical to military intelligence gathering. To manage high-level threats, Canada uses integrated national security enforcement teams. These groups blend RCMP investigators with intelligence agencies and occasionally military advisors. But the procedural wall remains intact. These teams treat terrorists as domestic criminals. They must secure search warrants, preserve chain of evidence, and build a case for a judge. The military bypasses this process to directly target enemy networks. You will also see RCMP emergency response teams utilizing heavy armored vehicles and advanced tactical gear. Look closely at the bold lettering separating these units from military convoys. These specialized units are deployed for hostage rescues and executing high-risk arrest warrants against armed suspects. Their objective is always to preserve life and secure a suspect for trial, never to execute a kinetic military strike. We also see them working side by side during domestic disasters, like massive wildfires or floods. The RCMP stays firmly in its lane, enforcing mandatory evacuations, preventing looting, and controlling evacuation routes. Meanwhile, the military deploys its unique logistics capability. They bring in heavy air transport, build emergency infrastructure, and physically move massive volumes of supplies and personnel. They share the same operational space, and they serve the exact same national interest. But they execute completely different skill sets, and neither absorbs the legal authority of the other. All the historical tradition and specialized gear points back to a single truth. The RCMP builds cases to arrest criminals. The military builds readiness to defeat enemies. This decision tree maps out the reality for anyone choosing where to invest their service. It starts with one question: what kind of impact do you want to make? If your focus is gathering evidence, solving localized problems, and working directly with the public, you belong on the RCMP path. Your daily reality will be interviewing witnesses, managing mental health crises, filing endless administrative reports, and navigating constitutional law. The trade-off is accepting that you will never deploy to a combat zone, you will never lead a military maneuver, and your actions will always be subject to intense public and legal scrutiny. If your goal is to push your physical limits in austere environments and project national power abroad, you belong in the Canadian Armed Forces. Your reality involves international deployments, mastering heavy weapon systems, and maintaining peak combat readiness for threats that originate outside Canadian borders. The trade-off here is total detachment from domestic policing. You will not investigate local crimes, you will not patrol civilian streets, and your daily work remains largely invisible to the communities back home. Career advancement in the RCMP requires sharp investigative intellect and administrative capability. Earning those military-style ranks on a police uniform means you know how to manage an investigative team, not a battlefield. The red uniform carries 150 years of tradition, but tradition doesn't dictate authority. Whether you are applying for a badge or just evaluating the news, judge the institution by the laws that govern it, not the history of its uniform.